Welcome to Direwolf Education. I'm Arlene Mulder, Managing Director of Direwolf, where we focus on protecting the practice. Today we talk about what to do when you get hacked. We've looked at cybersecurity, what's been happening in the industry, and today we'll talk about if you get hacked, what are the next steps? With me today, welcome back Ryan.
Thank you, Arlene.
Is Ryan van der Coolwijk, the Head of Product of Cybersecurity at iToo. Ryan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Remind me again, how did you get into this industry of cyber?
So started off in IT, development for an IT security company, then moved into a consulting role with one of the big audit firms, looking at company cybersecurity postures, business continuity, and just the bug bit as far as cybersecurity is concerned. I then had the opportunity to get involved in a cyber insurance startup. I had been conned into believing insurance was all about lunches and golf. Unfortunately not. Yeah, it's not. And from there, that was a business that was acquired by Hollard, and as part of that, I moved across to Hollard to start up cyber insurance there.
So cyber can sound quite intimidating. Cyber attacks, you get hacked. It's quite scary, let's be honest.
Absolutely, very
so
stressful.
I want to first go into what can we do to prevent it. So maybe put in all the steps you can to protect yourself. So let's start there. What can we do to reduce our risk? But then, of course, I think it's just a matter of time. We're all going to get hacked. So it's just, when is it going to happen? Then we can go into the steps. If this happens to you, hopefully never does, but if it does, what are the steps? So let's start with, how do we avoid this? Or what can we best do to protect ourselves?
A lot of it's going to sound very simplistic. Passwords. I mean, it's age old. We hate them. They're silly and they're
and
painful.
You set the same password for all your websites, right?
All your websites.
Don't do it.
And then you think you're smart. You go, well, I'm going to use password as my password, but I'm going to change the A to an @ sign, and I'll put exclamation mark 1, 2, 3 at the end. No one's going to guess it. They will. That's the first sort of things that the hackers look at. So use a more complex password. I know it's a pain. Maybe use a password vault or something like that to help you remember these passwords. If you can, implement what they call multi-factor authentication, whereby you use a username and password, and then you get a one-time PIN that's sent to your phone, either in an app or via an SMS or like, and that just sort of ensures that you have more secure access into your systems and your platform. So passwords, a big sort of bugbear, but important to get right. Then the second thing is patching. So unfortunately there are bugs and there are security weaknesses in software. Hackers are constantly on the lookout for these, and when they exploit them, they try and do this en masse. The patches and updates that you'll have from Windows and all those sorts of things are released to address these and to sort of cover them off. So important to apply those as soon as you can after they're released, so that you're not potentially a victim to those. Another thing which you can do that goes a long way, both in your sort of personal capacity as well as at work, is be super vigilant, aware and skeptical. Anything that seems too good to be true, mails from people you don't know, weird attachments, links to click onto things, be super, super careful of those.
I want to say, you did not win an iPhone, and a rich aunt that you didn't know about did not die. That is never true.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how we all kind of fall for it because we want it to be
Absolutely,
true.
and the stories that tell are really convincing.
Yeah. Those are some great tips. They sound quite obvious, but I wonder how many of us actually do them.
And consistently is the key.
Yes.
Then I just want to touch on, you raised a really good point in that unfortunately there's a good chance that companies are going to get compromised. We see it all the time. There's a lot of activity going on out there. So really important is then to also consider, if I do get hacked or compromised, how do I go about making sure that I can recover from that? And this is where it's important to make sure that you have proper backups generated, that you're securing and protecting these backups so that you've got them available in the event of an incident. Having proactive monitoring, so if something does happen, you can flag it sooner and you can respond hopefully before you incur the damages.
Okay, so let's say we did now everything we could. We did try and protect our data, but we get hacked.
Sure.
Okay, so firstly, what do you see? How do people normally find out that they've been hacked?
One of two, because the most common claims we see is ransomware, and the second is business email compromise, or BEC. So with ransomwares, quite often it used to be you'd come in, black screen, message on the computer to say, hey, guess what, we've broken in, we've encrypted all your data, we've stolen some data, this is the wallet address, please contact this or pay money into this, in order to stop us from publishing or give you the keys back. So that was kind of the big first kicker that, oh, we've been hacked. We have seen some more brazen attacks of late, so we've even had instances where the hackers have started to WhatsApp directors of the business. In one instance, they actually even phoned to say, hey, we are being serious. You can see how much access we've got. When are you going to pay us? So quite often, if it is a ransomware sort of incident and the hackers are looking for the payment, they will make it known to you very clearly that they have got access. Business email compromise, unfortunately what we see there is somebody's paid money to the wrong address, you're looking to recover your funds, or you've paid and they're saying, hey, you haven't paid us yet, and it kind of comes to light at that point.
Okay, so the moment that you're now aware something happened, what do you do first?
Take 5 seconds to catch your breath, because it is an incredibly stressful, horrible experience for companies to go through. We've seen many of those on our side. Well, it depends on whether you've got insurance or not. So if you've got insurance, get on the horn, phone your insurer. We've got processes to try and walk through and take a lot of the angst out of that and manage the process for you. If you don't, I suppose you take a step back and you follow the same processes, but you're kind of working through a lot of these on your own, finding the resources to do it. If we walk through the typical sort of response process from our end, we've got an emergency 24/7 response hotline that gives our insureds immediate access to IT security professionals that are going to come on site and determine has an incident actually occurred.
So I think it's great if we actually share the insurance process, because then that's what you can follow. So the first thing when you know one of your clients hacked is you call the IT guys and you see, did it really happen? What do they have access to? I guess you try to find out what is the scenario.
Absolutely. So they'll get on board to determine, has there been a compromise? How do we contain that environment? So prevent further spread of data, get the hackers out of there, determine what they did. So have they left backdoors into the environment so they can access it again later? Have they stolen data? And really answer all those questions.
Tell me, how long does this process normally take?
It does unfortunately vary quite a bit from one sort of company to the next, depending on how good the hackers were, how complex is the IT environment, etc., etc. Our average experience is that the guys are able to give you a pretty good picture of how they got in, what they did, was data compromised within 24 hours.
Great, okay, then what's the next step?
We also, especially when you've got POPI in place now, we have attorneys that come on board very early so that they can assist and guide you in what needs to happen from a regulatory perspective. There are notification requirements where you need to let regulators know within defined time periods of what's happened, etc. So we've got the legal guys that come on board and help out to give you that sort of guidance and ensure that you don't fall foul of any regulatory requirements. A big thing is whether or not the incident is broken out into the media. So if it has, you need to very quickly sort of manage the potential negative reputational damage that you're facing, communicate with those that have been impacted. So PR, if it has broken out into the media, comes in very, very early. Otherwise, what you would typically do is try and get a little bit of a picture of what's actually happened. So you don't want to go running to the press and, sort of waving flags going, the end of the world is nigh, and it turns out to be a minor incident. So if you have got a bit of time on your side, you look to manage the PR accordingly from that. So it tends to be a fluid process that iterates through investigation, legal, PR. As it becomes known who has been impacted, what sort of data was compromised, you'll often go into a process of communicating with those clients or patients or whatever you may be dealing with to let them know that this has happened.
So tell me, to notify, so on the communication side, what is the time frame? Are you required to notify within a certain period? What is also best? Is it better to let your clients know sooner?
So the earlier and the more openly you can communicate, the better. So it does kind of depend on, as soon as you can identify who has been impacted and what sort of data, rather communicate with them as soon as you can so that you can prevent them from suffering any further damages. We offer the ability to offer those who have been impacted or their data was compromised, maybe a better way to put it, the ability to sign up and get alerts if there's any activity on their credit record, for example. Okay. So the sooner you can let clients know, the sooner they can have these services in play. And if the hackers are looking to commit fraud against them, they can then sort of cancel those applications and things like that at that point, not potentially where some of that has happened. So
assist them to be more aware.
Absolutely.
your first tip.
And it shows that you care and that you're wanting to sort of do right. Nobody wants to get hacked.
Yes.
Nobody wants to lose their client data. So,
yes.
It just brings that across a lot more quickly.
Absolutely. Could you take us through some real examples? What have you seen? It'll be very interesting to hear exactly the process that people have gone through.
Talking to the guys who do the forensics across those teams, from a South African perspective, they are responding to multiple incidents a week, constantly have multiple engagements on the go. So there is a lot of activity happening from a South African perspective. We've seen some very sad stories. We've had companies where they came on risk, they had the right controls in place, look to save money, which is understandable given where the economy is at, and it's been tough through COVID and things, and unfortunately scaled back on some of their security spend, not worrying about the backups as much and cutting corners here and stuff. One of the companies in particular suffered a ransomware incident with that. I'm actually going to take a step back. So you get what they call malware, which is really just abbreviation for malicious software. So it's programs that have been written to be a little bit nasty. Ransomware is a variant of that, goes into a computer environment or network, and it encrypts all of the data in there. And typically you then have a ransom to get the keys to decrypt that data and regain access.
To get access back to your data.
Absolutely. So they had a ransomware incident because they'd neglected the backups. Everything was encrypted. Literally the entire environment. There was nothing they could recover from. We had the IT teams in there, tried every sort of mechanism to try and decrypt the data, regain control of it. And unfortunately there was nothing they could do. That business unfortunately had to close its doors down the road because they had nothing to go from. They were under financial pressure to start off with, and this was just kind of the last nail in the coffin. Other of our clients, there are happy stories. It's not all sad news.
Give us a better one, please.
That one was not great. Where they've had the ransomware incident, we've got the teams on board. They've been able to identify how the hackers got in there, contain the environment, start to recover. In some instances, we've had to pay ransoms. So we've had the teams in there who've then negotiated with the extortionists, have been successful in negotiating down the ransoms.
Give us a quick stat. How often is the ransom paid? How often do you get out of not paying the ransom?
So the ransoms are paid more frequently now the data has been compromised, because companies are ultimately looking after their clients and stuff and don't want their data out in the public domain. I would say ransoms are paid around about 15 to 20% of the time.
Okay, sorry, back to your story. So the malware came in, they
encrypted the environment and stuff. We got the IT team in to contain it, to help them rebuild and get the data recovered. Legal to make sure that all the sort of notifications to the regulator was managed. PR, comms to staff, comms to clients, business partners, all of those sorts of things. We picked up their loss of revenue, so typically you're going to be down if you're having to rebuild your environment. So we pick up the loss of earnings that they suffered during that time, the increased cost of working in rebuilding, getting configurations back up and running, and getting your business back onto its feet again. We didn't see any into litigation from any of those, but had any of those clients come to sue them, we would have been picking up the defense and settlement of those liabilities.
In this example, how long did the company take to get back up and running?
With the one that I'm thinking of was from the time when they were aware that they had their environment was compromised and encrypted to when they were back up and running was about a week.
Okay, so they couldn't do business for a week, and then were they completely back to normal, or did it take some time? So
completely back to normal within a week, but the guys are really good at helping them get core functionality back up and running. So the critical parts of the business were up and trading within a day, and then it took a little bit more time to get other bits of the business back up and running, complete the investigations, analyze all the data to make sure that things were closed out. And then what we also did was we monitored that environment for another month thereafter, just to make sure that the hackers hadn't found some sort of backdoor or left behind something which still gave them access to that environment.
Do you perhaps have some examples where it wasn't just a virtual attack of some physical attacks that's happened? Yeah.
So we had a doctor's practice that, unfortunately, we still never determined why, but robbers broke in and they ransacked the offices, and in putting the paper files back together again and sort of re-establishing the office, they found that they couldn't account for some of the files, the doctor's files that were in physical hard paper form, and that triggered a cyber policy because there's a privacy breach of this sort of sensitive information. So there's the prime example of, well, I'll call the cyber insurance policy or cyber crime in general. You've got to look at sort of bigger picture as far as data privacy is concerned.
So anytime your data is lost or compromised, that's actually what we call a cyber policy, right?
Cyber sounds a lot scarier than going system and data. Yeah.
Cyber does sound a lot scarier.
It does, yeah.
Okay, wow, very interesting. So Ryan, tell me a little bit more examples, maybe in the email compromise side.
So business email compromise is definitely something that we've seen is on the rise. We're seeing a lot more claims because of that. Often because, and there's one example in particular that comes to mind, the hackers have put together an email looking as though it had come from Office 365. More and more companies have transitioned to Office 365 for a lot of good reasons. Mail came in and spoke. I mean, branding was on point. It was perfect. If I'd looked at it and you hadn't told me it was a hacking mail, I'm not sure I would have necessarily not fallen for it.
And did they change the email at all? Or
it looked legit. They actually spoofed the domain. It all looked amazing. It was really well done.
They could.
Yeah. The images are there, and there is technology which can fight against that, which we can maybe tap on with DMARC and stuff. Branding was right, everything that spoke to security feature in Office 365. Click on the link to access your profile and enable this feature. These are the steps you take. So, staff member, gosh, well, I want to be security conscious, I want to do my bit and secure my mailbox. Clicked on the link, went to a page which on the day was identical to what the landing page looked like. Same banners, same ads, the whole works. I mean, the hackers were on point with this.
So as you say, these are criminals who do this for a living. They're really good at their jobs.
No, they take it seriously. I mean, this is how they make their livings.
Yes.
So individual typed in their username and password. Hackers obviously then captured those credentials and then directed the person to the proper login page. They figured, must have typed in my username and password wrong, typed it in again, and that individual could actually go and enable the security features. So thought absolutely nothing of it, carried on with their life. And maybe just to touch on, we spoke about the multi-factor authentication up front. That would have prevented this attack because the hackers wouldn't have been able to now go and access the person's mailbox because they don't have the one-time pin. Because it wasn't, they went onto this mailbox and they built rules into that mailbox that effectively allowed them to inject themselves and see all the comms there. So when a mail was received into a mailbox, they built a forward rule that sent it onto a mailbox that they looked after and had the ability to send a mail back to this compromised mailbox and have it routed on as though it had been sent from there. Hackers are patient, if nothing else. So they waited 6 months, and this was a conveyancing attorney that was compromised. Waited 6 months, and just before a large transfer was about to go through, literally the day before, sent a mail saying, "Hey, listen, we changed our bank account details. Please, can you make the payment to X, Y, and Z?" Thankfully, it was a big number that was going to be paid, so the person who received it was like, seems a little bit strange, picked up the phone, made a call, and this is where the whole thing came to light. Lucky miss for us and them in this instance, but we've seen a lot of stories where unfortunately that's not been the case.
So before we go on, is there anything they could have done to prevent that? Any software, anything you can do to protect yourself against that?
So that one, the big sort of kicker would be if they had the multi-factor authentication, it would have been that much hard. The hackers would have been able to gain that unless they'd compromise you, get you to give that key. But then it starts becoming a little bit too sort of suspicious. I suppose monitoring of the mail traffic would also have helped to a degree, but MFA would have been the kicker in that instance. Yes. In almost all the claims that we have seen, there are kind of tidbits that as you look, I mean, hindsight is always 20/20. That as you look back, you're like, there was an indication, or that was something that we could have done. You know, it's simple password, missing patch, not having MFA. So there are building blocks you can put in place that will help you fight against this.
Any other examples you can share with us?
So we had one instance where it was staff at a company. It was a small call center, and they had all the right controls in place. So you couldn't, for example, take your phone in if you were calling. You didn't have it on your laptop. It was a computer that stayed in the call center environment. You got one record at a time. But these guys had 2 employees that basically, as they were sitting there, they used to jot down. They actually smuggled pencils and paper in their underwear into the call center and would jot down the details of who they were calling during the day. And then as they built up a bit of a sort of database or cache of these, they then sent a ransom demand to the employer saying, "Hey, excuse me, we've hacked into your environment. We have all of this data. Here is a sample of it. Please pay us X, Y, and Z in Bitcoin," I think it was Bitcoin, "or we're going to publish all the data."
So take us through the steps. What happened? How did the company deal with it?
So there they contacted us. It was one of our insureds. We deployed the incident response team. The forensic investigators got involved, took a look at the systems and data and access and stuff, and could then tie it back to these two employees who had done it. The employer sort of confronted them to say, oh, listen, have we seen this? Which they then owned up to, and it kind of played out from there.
Let's quickly touch on, so what do you need to do in the end? So you've picked up, this is the incident, you've got the IT guys in, you've done that, and then you've communicated. Do you then normally send in a team to fix whatever is there? Do you give recommendations to the client on these are the steps you can put in place so that this doesn't happen again?
Absolutely. So as part of that investigation process, at the end there is a report that's provided that will highlight exactly what was seen, where the weaknesses were. It does have recommendations on what can be done to try and prevent a reoccurrence of this, and all the insights that was gathered through that investigation process. Not that that's the only point those things are communicated. Yes. So through the investigation, if they're investigating, they say, oh, here's a missing patch on that, they'll make the teams aware so that those can be applied. So it is a really collaborative consulting process. We often find the forensic teams work closely with a company's in-house IT team to recover the environment.
Okay, well, quite a lot for today. So if you can summarize it for us, any other tips for people, or if you could say, okay, 3 things you should remember if you do get hacked, what should you remember?
Big one, first off, is contact the experts to help you out. Sometimes you need to spend a little bit more money to save a lot of money down the road, and a lot of heartache and a lot of tears. So if you do have an incident, get the experts on site as quickly as you can. Try not to fiddle your way through it yourself. Don't try and dodge regulators and things like that, or hide things from the press and the media. If it does come out, it'll only make you look that much worse. So play open cards, be transparent, work with regulators and law enforcement and all these parties. Ultimately, it's to your benefit. Second to that, I think, is the awareness and understanding that South Africa is very much exposed to cybercrime. Don't believe for a second that because we're at the bottom part of Africa, no one knows we exist. We are all part of the same global network. For hackers, it's a numbers game. Guys are going to specifically target businesses, which we see in South Africa, but also guys who are going to spread their ransomware far and wide and see who they can compromise. Then it's a numbers game. They don't care where you are. If they can get in and they can encrypt your data, demand a ransom, the more people, the more likely they are to get paid their ransom. So don't for a second believe that you can't be compromised. What we discussed earlier on in trying to protect your environment. So there are simple steps you can take to look after yourself. Things like the multi-factor authentication and passwords, the patching, having disconnected backups, and being vigilant around falling victim to things. So this realization that you could get compromised is to have the mechanisms in place and plan for how do we go about recovering if we have now fallen victim to this. So things like having the backups and having those protected from things like ransomware, having response teams and plans and things like that in place.
Okay, so at the end of every episode, we ask for a book recommendation. Do you have any books for us?
So interesting with digital and artificial intelligence and stuff. So an interesting book I've been reading is Life 3.0, Being a Human Being in the Time of Artificial Intelligence, just to really play with your brain and look at what the future could hold.
Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today. It was extremely interesting, and I guess we understand a little bit better now what to do when we get hacked. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.